Imagine waking up in a freezing stone hut, snow piling against your door, and the wind cutting through every crack. What would you eat to survive the dead of winter? Most people think medieval peasants starved on stale bread and boiled water, but the truth is far stranger and a little shocking. In those harsh months, they foraged frozen roots, carefully scraped lichens off trees, and even drank broth made from bones long buried in the soil, because wasting a single scrap could mean death. And yet, some managed to enjoy treats you'd never expect: fermented vegetables, preserved fruits, and even honey, if you were lucky. But here's the twist. Winter wasn't just about food. It was a game of survival strategy, knowing exactly which wild herbs could heal frostbite, which mushrooms would poison, and which grains could last months in cold storage. Picture a family huddled around a tiny fire, sharing a pot of watery stew, each bite a fight against hunger, each spoonful a lesson in resourcefulness. You might be surprised to learn that even in this freezing darkness, peasants celebrated small luxuries: roasted nuts, dried berries, or the occasional salted fish brought from rivers miles away. And it wasn't just survival, it was also fear, because one wrong move, one spoiled batch of food, could wipe out weeks of hard work. Some peasants had secret winter stores hidden under floorboards or in straw beds passed down through generations. Imagine stumbling upon a hidden stash and knowing it might save your life. By midwinter, ingenuity ruled, melting snow for water, turning turnips into makeshift bread, and cooking with what little fat remained, all while keeping morale alive with stories, songs, and shared laughter that warmed more than the fire ever could. And just when you think you've understood it, here's the real shocker. Many medieval peasants didn't just survive, they thrived nutritionally in ways modern diets could envy, thanks to variety, foraging skills, and incredible knowledge of nature's hidden pantry. So next time you complain about your fridge being empty, remember this: they survived months of frozen misery, with scraps and wild plants, and in the end, the secret ingredient wasn't just food, it was ingenuity, courage, and a community that refused to let winter win. But here's the part most people don't know. Peasants weren't helpless victims of the cold. They were masters of improvisation. When snow buried the fields, they turned to ice fishing, breaking frozen rivers with axes to pull out fish that would sustain them for days. They dug through frozen soil for hidden root vegetables, sometimes eating things we'd never dare touch today. And yet, the creativity didn't stop at survival. Peasants had tiny rituals to make winter bearable, like sharing a single candle's flame for light and warmth, or turning simple barley into sweet porridge for children. Imagine the tension when a storm blocked supplies from the nearest town. One miscalculation, and a family could go days without a proper meal. But the clever ones had secret techniques: fermenting cabbage for vitamin C, drying herbs to prevent scurvy, even making soups from leftover scraps that packed more nutrition than a modern meal. And here's a twist you won't see coming. Some peasants developed an almost gourmet sense of taste, knowing exactly how to season food with wild herbs, berries, and even moss, turning survival into small, unforgettable pleasures. The stakes were high: cold, hunger, disease. But each winter also taught resilience, and by the end, when spring finally arrived, those who survived were stronger, healthier, and wiser than anyone could imagine. The biggest secret? Survival in winter wasn't just about what they ate. It was about knowing nature, planning ahead, and never underestimating the smallest things that could save a life. You think your pantry is stocked? Peasants did this with dirt, snow, and ingenuity. And now, here's the part that truly flips everything you thought you knew. While we imagine peasants scraping by on scraps, some actually had a secret weapon hidden in plain sight: winter superfoods most of us ignore today. Dried beans, fermented cabbage, nettles, and even certain lichens packed enough nutrients to keep entire villages alive through the harshest winters. Families that mastered this secret didn't just survive. They thrived while neighbors starved. And it wasn't luck. It was knowledge passed quietly from parent to child, a mix of science, intuition, and observation that turned the dead of winter from a nightmare into a test of skill and cunning. Think about it. They could turn bones, snow, and weeds into hearty stews, find hidden edibles in frozen fields, and even preserve meat for months using smoke and salt, without modern tools or electricity. And here's the shocking reveal. Many of the foods peasants depended on back then, root vegetables, fermented foods, wild herbs, are now celebrated as superfoods in fancy diets centuries ahead of modern science. So, when you sit down with your comfort food this winter, remember this. Medieval peasants didn't just eat to survive. They engineered survival, and in doing so, unlocked a secret recipe for resilience, health, and endurance that we are only beginning to understand today. The cold didn't break them, scarcity didn't stop them, and hunger didn't defeat them. Their greatest weapon was wisdom, passed quietly through generations. And that, in the end, is the story winter tried to bury. But now you know it. Winter in the Middle Ages was more than just too cold. It was a test of wit, courage, and sheer survival, and peasants faced it with a mix of fear, skill, and stubborn creativity that few today can imagine. Picture this: a tiny stone hut, snow draped over the roof, wind rattling the shutters, and a family huddled together with barely enough firewood to keep frost from biting through their clothes. What did they eat? Not just stale bread and thin gruel as most people imagine. No, peasants became masters of making the impossible edible. They dug frozen roots from snow-packed soil, scraped lichens off trees, and sometimes boiled old bones to extract every last bit of nutrition, because wasting a scrap could mean starvation. But it wasn't all grim. Some managed to enjoy hidden luxuries: fermented vegetables, preserved fruits, and honey when they were lucky enough to find or trade for it. And here's the first twist that surprises most people. They didn't just survive winter. They developed an almost scientific knowledge of food and nature. They knew which wild herbs healed frostbite, which mushrooms could poison, and which grains could last months in ice-cold storage. Families would huddle around a small fire, sharing a watery stew, but each spoonful was a lesson in ingenuity, resourcefulness, and resilience. You think you know hardship? Imagine a storm closing the roads, supplies cut off, and snow burying the fields. One mistake could erase weeks of effort. Yet, peasants had secret winter stores hidden under straw or floorboards, passed down through generations, which could save lives. And here's a mind-bending fact. Despite the cold, hunger, and disease, medieval peasants sometimes had more balanced diets than modern urban workers. Thanks to variety, wild foraging, and clever preservation, by midwinter, survival became an art form. Melting snow for water, turning turnips into makeshift bread, and cooking with tiny amounts of fat, all while keeping morale alive with songs, stories, and laughter around the fire that warmed more than the hearth ever could. But survival wasn't just about food. It was strategy. Ice fishing in frozen rivers, digging for hidden root vegetables, foraging for berries under snow, and fermenting cabbage for vitamin C were all part of a complex system no one dared ignore. Some peasants developed a nearly gourmet sense of taste, knowing which wild herbs or moss could flavor a humble stew, turning bleak survival into tiny moments of joy. And when disease struck or frostbitten hands made simple chores deadly, their knowledge of medicinal plants and home remedies often decided who lived and who died. Yet the most astonishing thing, the foods peasants relied on for survival, root vegetables, fermented foods, wild herbs, dried beans, are now hailed as superfoods in modern nutrition. They thrived on what we consider humble or even strange, proving that necessity breeds brilliance. And the final twist, the real reveal, is this. Winter wasn't just a season of scarcity. It was a season of learning, ingenuity, and quiet triumph. Families that mastered hidden techniques, secret stores, and knowledge of the natural world didn't just endure. They became stronger, healthier, and wiser with each passing year. Cold, hunger, and storms were never just enemies, they were teachers. Imagine enduring weeks of frost, scraping snow for food, boiling bones for broth, yet still finding ways to laugh, celebrate, and preserve life. That resilience, the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to thrive in extreme conditions, is something modern society often overlooks. Yet, it shaped generations. So, when you complain about a chilly day or a sparse pantry, remember this. Medieval peasants survived winters that would kill most of us today, using nothing but dirt, snow, weeds, and sheer cleverness. Their greatest weapon wasn't a tool or a weapon. It was knowledge, observation, and a deep connection to the natural world. They turned what seemed hopeless into survival, and what seemed unbearable into small pleasures that kept hope alive. And that, in the end, is the hidden secret of winter in the Middle Ages, a lesson in resilience, resourcefulness, and humanity that still matters today. These peasants faced death every winter, and yet managed to thrive, leaving behind not just stories, but a blueprint of survival that still fascinates and inspires. So next time you see frost outside your window, remember, long before modern kitchens, supermarkets, and heating, people survived, really survived, against the deadliest season with nothing but their wits, courage, and the quiet genius of knowing how to live with nature. That is the true, shocking, and inspiring story of what medieval peasants really ate in the dead of winter, and why understanding it might just change the way you see food, survival, and human ingenuity forever.